One of the things that's nice about Unity Fellowship is the fact that no matter whether you're white, black, brown, purple, green, gay, straight, bi, trans, you're welcome here. It's just the mindset of everybody here, and Pastor Bob all the way down. Everybody here. Uh, it's it's home, and you feel like you're going home. You feel like you're in a big accepting family when you're here.
So what makes Unity Fellowship different from other churches in Owensboro is their focus on making sure that everyone feels welcomed and accepted with no conditions. They're accepting of the LGBTQ plus community, of different people from different backgrounds and cultures, and this is what really led me to joining Unity Fellowship. And I also feel like many churches focus on the individual, but we are actually meant to be in relationship with others. The concept of Ubuntu, that if one person is oppressed, that all people are oppressed. And I feel like Pastor Bob, in his sermons, he really focuses on systemic injustices and oppression, and that God is on the side of the oppressed.
Well, after many years of being out of the church, we came to a point where we were ready to find a church, but I in particular knew that I no longer wanted a part of what I had experienced as a younger person. My soul and spirit had just no longer aligned with what I was being taught about myself. So I left the church for many years, and then as a couple years later, we decided we wanted to return to a church. So I knew part of that had to be a church that was totally accepting and that not just welcome to come to the door, but could fully participate in all regard, should we desire. And so we began to visit churches, and we visited Unity Fellowship a while back, and felt like we had made a discovery in a church home.
And we also like this church because it's a teaching church. Every Sunday we have the opportunity after the service, or even sometimes during it, if we have questions and we're not sure of what he's talking about, or if we have questions as to the sermon that he's preaching, that we're allowed to do that. And that's something that I've never had in a church. And it's been very enlightening, and I've learned a lot about myself, and I've learned about a lot of things, actually. And above and beyond anything else, I know that I'm loved. I know that Scott's loved, and I know that we're loved together.
And so it's not just like going to mass at a big church and you just go in, hear the thing, get up and leave. Here you actually are charged with asking yourself, what does it mean? And the membership is small enough we can all interact during the sermon as well as after the sermon. So we can ask each other questions. You learn from other people with their comments or their questions about whatever we're discussing that week or what was discussed the week before or whatever. And unlike a large church where you just know the people from sight, you actually know the people here. Whether they are active in doing something or they're just here every week and they participate in how are you doing and stuff like that. Or they tell you how somebody else that they've talked to that you haven't seen is doing. So it's like a very large, it's not just a church family, it's a large family.
Just because you came from a Baptist background or a Pentecostal background or a Catholic background doesn't mean you're not welcome. Unity will surprises a lot of people because everyone is accepted. You will feel comfortable. You won't feel out of place. You won't feel judged. You'll feel like you belong.
folks, this is Pastor Bob coming to you from Unity Fellowship. You may be really sick of church. You may have given up on church a long time ago, and maybe you're not even looking for a place. But I want to invite you to a faith community where you'll be safe, where you can be accepted for who you are, always, for whoever you are right now on your faith journey. Check us out on Facebook Live. Check us out on Zoom. I think you'll find a place that you're safe, a place that you'll be accepted, a place that you'll feel comfortable.
What makes Unity Fellowship different from other churches in Owensboro is their focus on making sure that everyone feels welcomed and accepted with no conditions. They're accepting of the LGBTQ plus community, of different people from different backgrounds and cultures, and this is what really led me to joining Unity Fellowship. This community, at its heart, is open to everyone, and even if you are on the fence and you might disagree, we are still open to having that dialogue and that discussion that fosters growth and understanding. So I feel like the people who come to Unity Fellowship are so open and loving that even if you didn't agree with something that the church promotes, that you're still able to express that and not be judged.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Happy Easter. The traditional greeting on Easter is, "He is risen," and the response is, "He is risen indeed." So let's do that together. He is risen.
He is risen indeed.
Thank you. And we've got a couple of special things planned for you today on Easter, as well as Alan has fixed a big old Easter lunch for anyone who can stay and share a meal with us. This is a safe place for everyone, and we are so glad that you have found us wherever in the world you may have come from. Whether you're there in person or on Facebook or on Zoom or on our webpage, we are so glad that you have discovered us and have joined us for worship today. Let me introduce our associate pastor, Pastor Gator Lone Wolf. Say a word of welcome as well.
I echo Bob's words this morning, welcoming everyone, whatever platform you're tuning in from. As Bob said, this is a safe space. This is a space where you can ask questions, a space where you can be who you are, and especially a space where you will be loved. And so we want to welcome you this morning and celebrate Easter with you, and want to remind you to please engage in the conversation, whether you be on Zoom or Facebook or website or in person. That's how we fellowship here virtually. So As Bob opens it up to conversation later on in the service, please participate. We look forward to hearing from you.
Go ahead and go to the next screen if you would.
I'm Bonnie
Daniel?
Brown. I've taken up hiking in the last year, and I have found when I walk, when I hike, I ask God and God's creation to speak to me. And I have found myself drawn to barriers. I thought they were barriers in the first place. That's what I thought. Things like a creek that I had to jump across on the hike. And I'm not a good jumper at all. Sometimes it's a tree down in the middle of my path, and I have to somehow get over that tree. And that is just not pretty. I'm glad I'm hiking alone. Sometimes it's a really steep hill I have to get up and make my way across. Sometimes it's steps that I have to climb, and they're all uneven and canted in every direction. I found these barriers, and I didn't know how to cross them. But I did it. I was brave, and I tried to cross. And I'm going to get over because there's somebody coming past me. And I thought those were barriers, but what I realized were that they were liminal spaces. They were doorways or entryways into a new way of being. And I had to conquer my fears to do that. There's a liminal space behind me. It's a tree that has died, and it has fallen across the pathway into another tree. Can you see it there? That's a liminal space for me. When I go through a place like that, that's another entryway or doorway, and I think, what's on the other side of that? And it takes sometimes all of my courage to enter those obstacles or doorways or things when I don't know what's on the other side or what does the rest of this trail look like. And I have found that when I take that step of faith and trust God, I enter into a world of mystery and magic and hope, and it's an act of faith. Sometimes it's actually a leap of faith, and I'm learning so much about trusting God, and that is what the resurrection means to me. The resurrection, you know, the crucifixion looked like the end, didn't it? Yes. The tomb looked like the end, but they were just doorways to becoming. And that's what the resurrection means to me. Everything that looks like a barrier or a trial can be a doorway to becoming. And there can be victory and peace and courage in that awareness. I'm out here in the wild. Can you hear that? Did you hear that? What is that? That's heaven and nature singing. I hope you heard it. Happy Easter Day. Thanks be to God.
And that was our friend Bonnie Brown. A few years ago, I had asked some of my friends to help out when COVID first hit, and we knew we were going to be doing everything online. I asked some friends to assist me with the question, what does resurrection mean to me? We've got more from other friends a little bit later on, which I'll introduce later, but that was our friend Bonnie Brown, who's preached for us a few times and is a good friend of Unity Fellowship. I can't see what's next. Oh, the next video is the Easter song by Tiffany Coburn. Still can't see the screen.
Joys and concerns.
Oh, that's okay. That's what I thought. Time for any joys, news, and concerns that you might have. I don't have a brain, I guess. Somebody's got to tell me what to say next. But it's been a big week for us. Our daughter, granddaughter, and son-in-law have joined us here at home. And we're still keeping our distance because Debbie's immune system is compromised. She's had a rough week, but she's turned the corner and feeling much better. So that's a joy, a double joy, because they're here with us and that she's feeling so much improved over earlier this week. What's going on in your life? What joys, concerns, or news that you have to share with us?
Hello, Bob. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
For some reason, we can't get it on the computer. I don't know what it's set for, Facebook or Zoom, but it says the channel is coming soon. But I got it on my phone.
I don't know. Glad that you were able to join us. Did you have a concern or a joy?
No particular concerns or joys. I just I didn't know if you could do something to fix that. I've always got a joy that I'm alive after that nursing home experience and that, can't think of the disease, gosh. Pneumonia that I almost died from.
Yeah,
And I can walk and all kinds of things.
absolutely. Yeah. You've had a long recovery, but doing great.
Yes.
Happy for you. Real happy for you. We're rejoicing with that. Continuing.
Thank you.
Bob, I got a prayer request for all the trans two-spirit youth out there who are really reeling from the legislation and their parents and loved ones.
Right.
That the Creator really be with them and give them strength and be with the lawyers who are going to fight this in court.
Absolutely.
Bob, I just want to joy that for everyone that's here in person, everybody that's online. It's just a wonderful joy and a joy that we have another day to spend with our family and friends and our chosen families.
Right. Have you heard from Laura B? I know we were praying for her earlier this week.
Laura B is back home, but I've not heard any details as to what they found or anything like that, but she is home.
Back home is good. Anyone else? News, joys, concerns? Pastor G, would you lead us in prayer, please?
Oh, Creator, we come to you, many of us, on long journeys that have carried us throughout the years, that have brought us to this Easter morning. We remember old times with loved ones who are no longer here. Some of us struggle with Easter because of the scars church has left on us. We ask that you be with those whose prayers were raised this morning. Walk with them, give them courage and strength. Be with those unspoken prayers this morning and do the same for them. We ask that you renew us today on this Easter of 2023 so that our hearts and minds don't become overwhelmed with the negativity of the world. be with Bob as he opens our hearts and minds this morning through dialogue. And bless it so that it reaches each and every one of us and feeds us throughout this coming week. We give thanks also for Alan and the great food prepared and for this fellowship. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Our
Affirmation.
affirmation of oneness. Let's say this together as a reminder of who we are and what we value. We gather in oneness together. We praise and worship God together. We proclaim God together. We welcome and affirm all persons in God's love together, and we seek to live for God with every breath and heartbeat together. I would invite you to join our contact list by texting the word ADD, ADD, to 270-201-5022. The format that sends the text out requested that I change the time that I send it out because they considered anything before 9 o'clock quiet time. So it went out at 9 o'clock today and will probably go out at 9 o'clock in the future. But every Sunday at 9 o'clock, if I've done everything right, you'll receive a text with the topic for the day as well as links how you can join us. And if you're not on our contact list, I encourage you to join it by texting the word ADD to 270-201-5022. Our tithes and offerings. There are a number of ways that you can give and support this ministry. I encourage you to consider supporting the ministry financially, and if at all possible, to make it an ongoing gift to our church, because if you value what we do, you value what we stand for, you value the value that we give to you as you participate in worship with us, then please be one of our donors. You can do that a number of different ways. Texting the word GIVE, G-I-V-E, to 270-449-664. Or you can click the Donate Now button, which you can find on our webpage or on our Facebook page. You can go old school and send it to the P.O. Box by mail, 1401. That's in Owensboro, 42302. Or if you're there in person and would prefer, you can just drop it in an offering plate as you leave, one at each door as you leave today. We value every gift and appreciate every gift that you give, but we never want to put pressure on people to give. This is the next video. It's called Easter Medley by the Anthem Lights. We are up to the letter R in our, no, we're not. This is a bonus video, a bonus letter. I could not think of an appropriate Easter topic that started with an M. Maybe some of you will come up with that, but I could not think of it. So this is a bonus. We're skipping to the letter R today. R is for resurrection. Seemed like that's the only topic that really was appropriate for Easter today. What it means, what resurrection means. And so this is the video of our friends. Apologies before the video rolls to Pastor Gator Lone Wolf and to Dr. Roberto Shea Espinoza, whose names have changed since this video was created, and I could not figure out a way to change the titles on their slides. But let's hear what our friends say resurrection means to them.
What resurrection means to me? Well, when I think of resurrection, of course, I think of Easter. That is the high point of the Christian calendar. It is the day that really defines, in many ways, Christianity. And so I think of Easter, and the event that Easter celebrates is, of course, the resurrection of Jesus. And so it also means to me that resurrection can take place in our individual lives. We may experience some sort of death, some sort of loss, some being an old way that we find no longer works and we become new. So any sort of renewal or life, not to trivialize resurrection, but to say that we share in the resurrection when we share a new life and become a new person.
So several years ago, I was assisting victims of domestic and sexual violence, experiencing stories of how horrible humans can be to one another, especially those that they profess to love. To make matters worse, about 75% of the victims I was working with were under the age of 18, innocent children. At the time, the agency that I worked for developed a public awareness program for Holy Week, which had a logo developed by a local artist of the superimposed faces of the crucified Christ and a battered woman. When people would ask me how I survived the emotional stress of my job, I would tell them, if I did not believe in resurrection, I wouldn't. Resurrection to me represents God's almighty no to the horrible things that humans do to one another out of fear or anger or greed or jealousy. It's like God says, no, you aren't going to get away with injustice. You aren't going to get away with torture and violence and silencing. And no, you don't get to bury the evidence and just walk away feeling justified. On the other hand, resurrection is God's almighty yes to victims of injustice and the champions of justice. They might put us in the grave, but God won't let us stay there for long.
One of my favorite stories of the resurrection is from John chapter 20. It's a story of Jesus' disciple. Her name was Mary. She goes to the tomb to prepare the body of Jesus since there was no time to do that on Friday. And when she gets there, the tomb is empty. She races back and tells the other disciples, who get into a foot race to get to the tomb, and they go and they see that Jesus is gone, and they go back to where they were staying. But Mary stays outside the tomb. And these two angels are suddenly there, and they ask her why she's weeping, and she tells them that they've taken the body of Jesus, and she doesn't know what they've done with it. And then she turns around, and right there with her is Jesus, the risen, raised up Christ. And she does not recognize him. She thinks he's the gardener. That's what the writer says. She thinks he's the gardener. And then he says her name, Mary. And suddenly she sees him and she exclaims, Rabbi! And it's a beautiful, beautiful moment. One of the things I love about that story is that Mary thinks he's the gardener. And at first we're probably quick to dismiss that and say she was wrong, she was mistaken, it was really Jesus. But I actually think she was right. It's a garden after all. John begins the gospel with in the beginning, right? Echoes of Genesis, echoes of creation. And John ends the story in a garden. and Jesus is the gardener. I think what is being alluded to here is that Jesus is the gardener of the new creation, that there's something new. That what resurrection means, what Easter is trying to say, is that there is something new that is being brought into the world, that's bubbling up, that's fomenting, it's happening. Something new is happening in the world. And it's happening right in the middle of the old one. It doesn't happen in the absence of the old one. It isn't that we go somewhere else and we start a new creation up here somewhere. Right? It's not that all the bad old creation, decaying and dying creation gets wiped out and boom, new creation. The new creation begins in that garden, and it begins growing and growing and growing. Right in the middle of the death and decay of winter, spring begins to emerge. And for me, when I think about resurrection, I think about Easter, and I specifically think about our calling in the world as Jesus people. It is to be a participant in that ever-expanding new creation. That right in the middle of death and decay, we bring a message of hope and renewal. That everything is heading somewhere good, and that we can trust it, and that it can be counted on.
When I think about what resurrection means to me, it's not simply that Jesus rose from the dead. The symbolism of resurrection is what really resounds with me today, is the symbolism of overcoming death. In other words, overcoming what our greatest fears are. And Jesus resurrects us from that, invites us to be more than maybe our victimhood or our fear of situations or being excluded. Jesus invites us out of that grave into new life through Christ. And so when I think about resurrection, especially in these days with the coronavirus and all the fear and isolation, I think about a communal invitation to move beyond fear, trust and love one another, and do for one another. Doesn't mean you don't believe in science. You use the good wits God gave you, but you always remind yourself that even when it gets as bad as it can be, even if death comes, God is always with us. And it's not the end, but a beginning. And I lean into that with all I have, especially in these days.
We are living in, I feel like, the times of Good Friday and Holy Saturday. And as we want spring to come and we want to rush into the resurrection moment, we need to stop for a minute and think about what is resurrection. So as we are sitting in this Saturday moment amidst a global pandemic, waiting for the new life, waiting for resurrection, the waiting is hard. But we know that when we wait and when we reflect, we know that when resurrection comes, we know that it's about transformation, it's about a becoming moment, and it's ultimately about new life. And so that's what I think resurrection is.
To me, resurrection is a musical answer to what some people think is a mathematical question. The math being, was the stone rolled away? Was the tomb empty? I don't think that's the right question. I know the answer is musical, that when the song ends, you can sing again. When they say there's no love left in the world, you can prove them wrong. All you have to do is love again. Love lifts us up where we belong. Love is a many-splendored thing. All you need is love. Some people want to fill the world with silly love songs. Well, what's wrong with that? Love lifts us up where we belong, where eagles fly on a mountain high. All you need is love.
My thanks to our friends, my friends, for sharing what resurrection means to them. Our scripture today is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, and I'll begin reading there at verse 13. On the same day, 2 disciples were traveling to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about everything that had happened. And while they were discussing these things, Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, arrived arrived and joined them on their journey. They were prevented from recognizing him. He said to them, "What are you talking about as you walk along?" They stopped, their faces downcast. One of them, whose name was Cleopas, replied, "Are you the only visitor in Jerusalem who's unaware of the things that have taken place here in the last few days?" He said, "What things?" They said to him, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth. Because of his powerful deeds and words, he was recognized by God and all the people as a prophet. But our chief priests and our leaders handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped that he was the one who would redeem Israel. All these things happened 3 days ago." Skipping forward, when they came to Emmaus, he acted like he was going to go ahead. But they urged him, "Stay with us. It's nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went and stayed with them. After he took his seat at the table with them, he took the bread and he blessed it and he broke it and he gave it to them. And their eyes were opened and they recognized him in the breaking of the bread. And then he disappeared from their sight. Resurrection is a pretty strange story, if we're truly honest. Let's face it, dead people don't just walk out of their graves, unless we're talking about zombies, and that's a whole different story, isn't it? We all know that because we've heard the story of resurrection of Jesus so much, we've somehow normalized it. It's for those who did not grow up in church, however, hearing this story every Easter can be a bit confusing. A story about resurrection, even for those who did grow up in church, can become a little unsettling as well. It can have a certain kind of uneasiness about it. The resurrection of Jesus, not quite a rejection of it, perhaps, but this deep, nagging uncertainty about whether or not it really happened the way that we've been taught that it happened. I don't want to talk about doubts this morning, though. I want to talk about faith. We all have doubts. That's why we call it faith. Frederick Buechner wrote that doubts are the ants in the pants of faith. They keep it awake and moving. There can really not be real faith without doubt. But what I want to talk about is knowing this morning. And I want to invite you to participate as we talk about knowing. But I want to talk about the different ways that we know things and then open it up for us to discuss just a little bit. There are many ways that we know. There is objective knowing. That's seeing, hearing, touching, the thing that Mary and the disciples experienced who saw and touched Jesus after his resurrection. He appeared to them. Objective knowing would also include scientific knowledge. There is subjective knowing, which would include mystical experiences, perhaps the experience that Paul had on the Damascus Road, where he experienced, after Jesus had already ascended, he experienced some manifestation, some mystical experience of Jesus on Damascus Road, and felt God speaking, Jesus speaking to him in that experience. There is what some would call the unquestioned acceptance or blind faith kind of knowing, that we know because we've been taught it and we don't question it, and we have accepted it as a truth, as a fact. Then there is, on the other side of that, is the questioned acceptance. That's those who have had those nagging doubts and have struggled with whether or not to believe what they had blindly believed before, what they had not questioned, only they questioned their way through it. They reasoned their way and they resolved their way towards a place of faith. And they know because they've gone through that process. Then there is what I might call the imaginative, creative insight. This is the kind of knowing that comes to people in kind of just a moment of instantly knowing something that they may not have known before. It just kind of comes to them creatively, imaginatively. Poets and artists and philosophers and in some sense theologians as well have this imaginative, creative insight where the mind just opens up a new way of knowing that you didn't have before. There are other ways of knowing as well, but I want to end with the one called heart knowledge. Heart knowledge is the same kind of way that we experience love. People who ask, well, how do you know that you're in love with someone? And the response generally is, well, you just know. Your heart knows. It's from deep inside of you. You just know. The hymn, He Lived. Now, here's where I want to participate. I want you to participate with us in the discussion. How do you know resurrection? How do you experience resurrection? What are the ways? Maybe it's some combination of those different ways of knowing that I mentioned before, or maybe it's a different way that I didn't mention even. Now, what about you knows the resurrection? How have you experienced resurrection? This is where you get to participate in our discussion this morning, and I invite you to. If you are in person, I would ask you to ask for a microphone so that everybody on all the platforms will be able to hear you. Y'all just going to leave me hanging because it's Easter and
Bob, when you asked the question, I think about it in terms farther than the physical raising from the dead, the stone rolled away. And you ask, how do I know about resurrection? I think I see it most profoundly through nature and through times when there just seems no way for something to regrow, something to start again. It does. And it may not look the same as it did before.
Yeah.
But there's always, like Ecclesiastes says, there's a season for everything. And so I really know it through that more powerfully than scripture or being shamed into believing this or that.
Yeah. Nature is pretty powerful. And it's no surprise to anybody, really, that Easter comes in the spring. When everything is coming back to life, when the world itself, when creation itself is screaming, we're not dead. Someone else. How have you experienced resurrection, perhaps in your own life? Some experience that convinced you that resurrection can happen? Or how do you know for you?
Bob, this is Roy.
Hey, Roy.
I don't know exactly how to say about the resurrection, but I know what I believe and what comes to my mind. And the reasoning is in the past, when you get older, so many of your friends and relatives pass on. And 40, 50 years that, and I think that your body is a spirit. And when you die, that spirit leaves your body.
Someone else. Your experience. Perhaps some traumatic life experience that you've come back after you die. Anyone?
Bob, I do know, speaking of that, I do know people who have traumatic illnesses that barely made it, that once they recovered, they changed their life, or they had you have an opportunity to start over again.
Right. Mary and the disciples experience, and some experience with Jesus appearing to them. They describe seeing, feeling, touching Jesus, breaking bread with Jesus, etc. Paul, however, was a few years after Jesus had already resurrected and had ascended to the Father. Paul's experience with Jesus on the Damascus Road was a different kind of knowing. I don't know exactly what happened. What I do know is that Paul came out of that experience a changed man. He was transformed by it. He was never the same after that experience on the Damascus. They walk, they talk, they invite him to stay, they eat together, and then the stranger disappears. The part I like best about that whole story about the road to Emmaus is when they're explaining to this stranger, they think, we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. We had hoped, but their hopes were dashed. They were at this point, they were in the depths of depression. They had no hope left. Hopes were gone. We had hoped. That is the past tense. And then when the stranger disappears, kind of expression that John Wesley used to describe his conversion. He had reluctantly attended a Bible a study meeting in boring thing they could have been reading from in the world, but they were reading from Luther's preface to the Epistle to the Romans, and Wesley wrote about it, saying, while he was describing the change which God works in our hearts through faith in Christ, I felt my heart strangely warmed. Strangely warmed. Allow your heart this morning to be warmed. Permit renewal and resurrection to happen within you. So right now I want to ask all of us to just take a pause. Take a moment, be still and know God. Take a break. Breathe deep. Close your eyes if you'd like. Allow yourself to feel, to smell, to touch. Allow yourself to absorb. Allow your heart to connect with God. Know this. God is not satisfied with making you good or nice. That's not even really necessarily God's desire. And if you think that's what resurrection looks like, you might be wrong, because God isn't about making us spiffy, not about making us nicer. God is about making us new, transformed. If you're thinking all this sounds a little crazy, new life and wholeness in God, putting into practice things like loving our enemies and turning our cheeks, making the world a better place, you're right. It's pretty nuts. And totally the most true thing ever spoken. And best of all of us can experience it. It's for everyone. Resurrection is not just something that happened to Jesus on a Sunday 2,000 years ago. It's not just a hope that we have for someday in the future. And it's something that is happening every day, all around us. All that is to say that God can redeem anything and anyone. Let's harken back to those folks walking on the road to Emmaus for a moment. They just had one of the worst days of their life. Jesus, their friend, their mentor, had just been publicly executed. They had hoped that he would be the one to redeem Israel. All of their hopes were completely dashed until this stranger shows up, walking along the road in the midst of their desperation. Jesus is with them, and they felt their hearts strangely. Is respond, ask a question. Well, thank you for joining us. If no comments, no questions, I want to wish you a blessed Easter. If you're spending time with family, I hope you enjoy every moment of it. If you're staying for the fellowship meal, know that in my heart I'm there with you. And eat a turkey leg for me. Enjoy it. And please come back next week as we continue on our alphabetical journey through the scriptures. Thank you so much. Have a blessed day and a wonderful Easter. God bless all of you.